All right. Well, good morning, everyone. This is David Carter with the Kansas Energy Program at K-State's Engineering Extension Department. We appreciate your time this morning. We have lots of information to share with you, so we'll just go ahead and get to it. We'll just say from an administration point of view, this webinar is being recorded and we will post it onto our website. So if you need to review anything that we say, feel free to do so. So we're going to be talking about the USDA REAP grant program and the impacts of the Inflation Reduction Act, um, and we'll just get into it. So here's what to expect during this webinar. We're going to give an interview about the Kansas Energy Program, talk a little bit about the USDA Rural Development Program and specifically the REAP grant program. Information required both from the energy efficiency implementation projects and from the renewable energy system projects for the REAP grant application. And then finally, we'll get a little bit into understanding your energy bill and how that works into the REAP grant application and what kind of information we require from those. So getting into the Kansas Energy Program overview, this is us. This is the entire program. So from left to right, you have myself, David Carter. We have Stacy Harris, Kurt Foley, Ryan Hamill, and Mandy Putnam. Kurt, Ryan, and myself are the ones that do the grant applications and the energy assessments. We've been doing this since 2016 under a program with the Kansas Corporation Commission, where they wanted us to go out and provide some technical assistance to ag producers and rural small business owners in order for them to compete for the USDA REAP grants and bring some money to their business, their rural community, and of course to the state of Kansas. The Kansas Energy Program is entirely grant or contract funded. We don't get any money from K-State or the Board of Regents to operate our program, so it's just what we go out and get, and it's been a lot of fun. So this is where we go, and part of the reason to show this slide is not only to show the full breadth of the services we provide to the state of Kansas. You can see we've been a lot of places in the state of Kansas, but also to show you that the REAP grants are not the only thing that we do. We do a lot of educational events. We do some Kid Win challenges for the state, and those Kid Win challenges then feed into a national challenge that teams can go to. And we do some other work with schools through the K through 12 benchmarking projects that we've implemented, and then we provide some technical assistance to governmental entities through the Kansas Facility Conservation Improvement Program. So probably one of the consistent criticisms we hear about our work on the REAP grants is we are not the most speedy at getting those completed, but only because we're trying to shift priorities through the services that we provide. So what do we do for the small businesses and the ag producers? Well, we will provide no-cost energy assessments for energy efficiency improvements. Some of you may realize that particularly the energy, well, both require the energy assessment, both the energy efficiency and the renewable. But we will go out and actually conduct a site visit at the facility and calculate the energy savings from the improvements that they propose to implement. And then we complete the technical reports along with the REAP grant application submission. And then we will offer to provide ongoing energy use tracking if requested. So that's both for energy efficiency and the renewable energy projects that are implemented. We don't have a lot of takers on that, but there are some case studies that we would like to provide to both our federal funders and just to put up on the website to show that, hey, these things really do work. They will save you money. They'll help you invest back into your community. So it's just all a good information for us. We do roughly categorize the commercial facilities that we assist. And this is just interesting for a couple of reasons. One, it does show that grocery stores are far and away our largest client that we provide services to. But the interesting thing about the grocery stores is if you had looked at this a few years ago, um, they were the largest because of the energy efficiency improvements that they were making. And now many more of them are actually also implementing solar systems on their rooftops. And so they've just grown even larger. Um, and then also the ag producers back, if we had shown this, I don't know, maybe even 2 years ago, the ag producers were probably down at the bottom of our list of entities that we provide service to, but now they've grown to become our second largest category. These are just some of the energy assessment highlights for our program. We have conducted over 200 energy assessments and technical reports. Those resulted in 126 REAP grant applications, which brought in, if everything's implemented and they get the full reimbursement that was offered, brings in about $4 million to the state of Kansas and to those small businesses and their rural communities. In addition to that $4 million in federal funding, there is the potential for about another $1.7 million in annual energy cost savings. You can see in the bottom left there that of the 126 REAP grant applications that have had some type of conclusion, that means they're not still pending, 96% of those applications have received funding. So we feel pretty good about that. And you can see that only about 63% of the assessments that we do actually result in a REAP grant application going forward. So here's, again, our staff, but we also threw in a couple of members from the Kansas Corporation Commission, Lynn Retz, who's the executive director, Rick Pemberton, who's the energy division director. They don't necessarily provide any assistance on the small business side, but they do provide some assistance on the facility conservation improvement program. And they're integral members of our program, so I certainly wanted to include them. So we'll talk a little bit about the USDA rural development. This program is just fantastic for the United States and rural communities and ag producers and business owners in those rural communities. They operate more than 70 different programs that provide assistance to rural communities. They deliver over $40 billion a year in loans, loan guarantees, and grants to rural communities, and that's a big chunk of change. And they manage a $200 billion loan portfolio. So yeah, they're a big player on the scene. And in REAP investments alone, from 2018 to 22, they contributed $2 billion, and then Kansas had about 2.7 million of that. So they do a lot of good in the world, and well, maybe not the world, but certainly the United States. And we want to give them recognition and accolades for the services that they provide. So we'll talk specifically about the Rural Energy for America program, also known as REAP. So it's a grant and loan program for ag producers and rural small businesses. Now, we'll say that the ag producers do not have to meet either the population limit or the um, small business size standard according to the NAICS code under which they operate. But rural small businesses do. That's generally going to be an area that's less than 50,000 in size population. And then they also have to meet the small business size standard for the particular North America Industry Classification System code under which they operate. So that's one of the things that we have to have from the small business, not only their address, but their NAICS code. So the REAP program was created in the 2008 Farm Bill and reauthorized in 2014 and 2018, and it has since been augmented with the Inflation Reduction Act funding. So we'll get to that in a little bit later. But the program goal is to support energy efficiency improvements and installation of renewable energy systems that helps farmers, ranchers, and other small business owners to save money on their energy bills, but also supports the America's clean energy economy and helps cut carbon pollution. And we'll tell you that there are some people who don't necessarily care about either one of those last 2 points, but they still take advantage of the program, and they'll save money on their energy bills, and they will reduce America's dependence on foreign oil. So there's a little bit of something in there for everybody, and we welcome everybody who's eligible to participate. So here are the lists of some of the projects that are eligible under the renewable energy side. You have biomass, hydropower, solar, geothermal, hydrogen, and wind. And we'll tell you that our program has really only done solar. We've had a couple of geothermal projects, but not certainly not more than 2 or 3. We've done a lot of solar applications. On the energy efficiency side, almost everything runs is eligible if it actually does result in some energy savings. We've done a lot of lighting, we've done a lot of cooling and refrigeration, particularly for those grocery stores that we mentioned earlier. And then HVAC is also probably our one of our largest. So these first 4 here, we've done a lot. We have done some switching of diesel to electric for sprinkler pivots, and we've done some switching from diesel to electric for motors. Here's an example of one of they were using a diesel fueled tractor to run the rotor for the grain storage bin loading operation, and they switched to an electric motor for that. And some of these are kind of fun. We quite frequently will get onto a site visit, and it's an operation that we're not used to, so we get to learn a lot, and it's just always kind of neat to get into those situations. So we have a couple of slides here that describe the REAP grant process. So the first one is basically what happens with us, and the second one is once we submit it to USDA. So we do want the business to contact us. We realize that there are quite a few vendors on the call that will initiate the contact, and then they'll call us or send us an email saying, hey, I have a client who is interested in the REAP grant. That's fine. We don't mind that initial introduction, but we do want the business to contact us because, quite frankly, sometimes, you know, you guys are looking to sell your services and your solar installations, and we recognize that, but sometimes your clients aren't quite as wanting to implement that project as urgently as you want them to implement, and so what's happened sometimes in the past is we'll get started on the application based on your contact, and then we never receive information from the business client. And so we've we've expended that time and then it goes nowhere. So we want to know that the business is really interested in doing that. So we'll insist upon contacting those businesses ourselves. We'll send them a REAP information form that has pretty much all of the questions that we need answered in order to start their application and get moving forward on that. So from that initial contact, we'll collect the project info. We need the quotes and the proposals, utility bills, all of that. And for those of you who don't know, we need the copy of the exact bill. We can't use a summary. We can't just say, we can't have an Excel spreadsheet that says January they paid this much, February they paid this much. That doesn't do us any good. If we need to conduct a site visit, we'll go out there and do that, and then we'll write up the technical report and complete the application forms, which right now is a 4280, either 3A, 3B, or 3C, an SF424, an SF424C, an SF424D, an environmental checklist, and a vendor certification form. So we need all of those for a complete package. And then we will send all of those to the business for them to review and to sign. We generally send them a file that we call signature pages, and those are the last page of each of 4 of the 5 forms. The 424C doesn't require a signature, but then they can just download those, print them, sign them, and scan them and send them back to us. And then the application is submitted. So what happens once it leaves here, and this is very important, I just want to note this, we will not hear, our program will not hear if the entity is contacted by USDA for either approval or disapproval. Once we submit the application, USDA will deal with the business entity directly. So the only way we hear about the status of the application is if the owner contacts the installer and says, "Hey, we got the grant," and then either one of you contact us and says, "Hey, we got the grant." But generally USDA will not notify us directly. So, but once the grant application is submitted, the business can either wait for notification of grant approval, or if USDA has given confirmation that they have received a complete application packet, that business can start the project at its own risk. And the reason for that is because if they start before they know whether it's been approved, if it's ultimately disapproved, then that's going to be, 100% on the business. We will see this a number of times on the energy efficiency side. So say for instance, a grocery store loses one of their freezer units. Well, then yeah, obviously they have to replace that, and the sooner that they can replace that, the better for them. So many times they will start work on those before they've heard a conclusion on the application packet. But if down the road USDA does ultimately approve that grant, they will go back to the receipts that were incurred the day after that complete application was received. So there's a little, a little bit of strategy involved in this sometimes. So if awarded the funding, then once the business implements the project, they can submit the project receipts to the USDA Rural Development Office. Now, so a couple of things to note here is that when we submit the grant application, we will always ask the entity to submit matching funds for that. And that is their portion of the project costs that are not going to be reimbursed by USDA. So right now it's up to 50%. But the business does have to come up with 100% of the funding initially, and this is a reimbursement grant. So once they implement that project, they can submit receipts for reimbursement, but they do have to come up with all of the project costs up front. I don't think anything more than that. So there, things have become a little bit murkier in the REAP world because of the increase in the number of rounds that businesses have to submit their grant application. So the first round now starts with the September 30th submission deadline, which of course is coming up, and we still have a couple of applications that we're working on. So as soon as this webinar is over, we're going to get back on those. So anyways, so for the first round, the applications could be submitted anytime between July 1st and September 30th. And then the second round is December 31st. The third round is March 31st. And then the fourth round is June 30th. Now you can see in each one of these that if you submit it in that first round, you do get carried over from one round to the next without having to withdraw and resubmit your application. And here's the potential issue with if you've already started your project. So say last year you started your project and you didn't hear whether you were approved or not. Well, if it gets down to the June 30th and you still haven't been approved, but now you've already implemented your project, you now cannot resubmit that project for an application because you've already expended funds before that new complete application has been submitted. So all of those costs become ineligible. And so anyway, we just want to show you that for here, USDA does automatically just carry over your applications. I think we've heard recently in just this month that we've had several applications that were submitted from, I think, the December round that had just been approved. So it's taken a little while to get through the system. So here are some likely ineligible scenarios. We hear a lot from economic development people with Main Street programs, and they're saying, hey, we have this facility that's been unoccupied for a number of years. The new owners want to install a new HVAC. We really can't do much with that, particularly if you switch from, say that the previous owner, 5 years ago used to be a hardware store, and now it's going to be a computer server, warehouse, which is going to expend a lot more energy. So it's not apples to apples. We just can't compare any of the energy savings. Likewise, if you're expanding, our calculations are required to have an energy savings of some kind. So if you're expanding, likely you're going to actually be using more energy than the previous system. So generally we're going to say, yeah, that's not going to be eligible. If the equipment is associated with a residence, that's always going to be an issue for us because we have to be able to show how much of the energy savings are actually associated with the business as opposed to the residents. And then you can read down the list. We'll say that a number of grocery stores sometimes purchase used equipment, and used equipment is an ineligible project cost. If that equipment has been refurbished, means it's been sent back to the manufacturer and completely revamped and restored, then that is okay. But you'd have to provide some kind of documentation on that. Okay, so let's talk about the impact of the Inflation Reduction Act on the REAP grant. So pre-IRA, the potential reimbursement was up to 25%, and the max for energy efficiency projects was $250,000. The max for renewable energy was $500,000. So with the the augmentation from the RRA, the potential reimbursement is now up to 50%. And the reason we say up to is because if USDA doesn't have enough money to fund all of the grant applications, they'll look at the scores for those and they'll try and fund fully up until, they might only have 30% of the requests for, some of the remaining ones. And they'll go to that entity and say, well, we don't have the 25,000 you requested. Are you okay with accepting only 20,000? And then the entity can say, yeah, sure, I'll take that. Or they can say, no, we really want the full 50%, and then USDA will go down to the next entity in the list and they'll take that previous entity's application and put it into the national competition to see how it would fare there. And so the cap on the energy efficiency projects has increased to 500,000, and for renewable energy systems, the max is now 1 million. So something to note here for those of you who may not know it, the entity can actually apply for both an energy efficiency project and a renewable energy efficiency in the same year. The max any one entity can receive during that year is 1.5 million. So you can't get any more than that. Another impact is that you can see that the investment into the REAP grant from 2018 to 2022 was approximately 2.08 billion in the REAP program, and in FY 23 and 24 alone, the increased funding is 1.05 billion. So more money. Another new thing that they've added is that there's a new pool of money for underutilized technology. This is a separate pool that you can tap into if your project is for technologies that haven't been commonly supported in past REAP cycles. So what they do is they will look at the fiscal year ending from 2 years ago and see what made up less than 20% of that project pool, and that would be deemed to be an underutilized technology. So the two technologies that are ineligible for FY 2023 are solar and energy efficiency. All others would be applicable for that specific funding. And then this initially set aside 145.5 million in yearly competitions in FY 23 and 24. So here's the impact on the submission dates. It used to be pre-IRA. There were only two. There was an October 31st, which was the initial round for that particular fiscal year, and those were reserved for total project costs of 80,000 or less. So you were making, in most cases, a federal request for 20,000 or below, for 25%. And then there was a second round where they would start reviewing March 31st. Those were for all eligible projects. They would still look at the 80,000 and below first, and then they would have an opening for all projects, both 80,000 and below and 80,000 and above. With the IRA, there are now quarterly submission rounds and reviews. So now just keep in mind that applications can be submitted year round. It doesn't matter. USDA is only going to start reviewing those applications on these specific dates: September 30th, December 31st, March 31st, and June 30th. And again, on the right-hand side, if you submitted in July, that's fine. And then you would either have the option, once that completed application was received by USDA, you can either wait for approval, which could be even until March or beyond, or you could implement that project at your own risk, knowing that if it was approved at a later date, they would go back to receipts that were incurred the day after that completed application was submitted. We'll tell you that with these 4 quarterly submissions and keeping track of, an application that was submitted for the September 30th round, it's now, next March, and, keeping track of which ones were, um, moved to the December and to the March round, it is a little bit more squirrely both on our part and on USDA's part. So please, I would just say, have patience with them. The One of the big changes, of course, is in the scoring rubric. You can see the pre-IRA um, had 2 things that are no longer considered: the size of the request and the existing business. So you would get points for those pre-IRA. Now those are not in the scoring at all. And you can see the changes here on the commitment of funds. We lost 5 points here for the commitment of funds and gained 5 points under the environmental benefits. But one of the big things is is the project located in a disadvantaged or distressed community, 15 points. So if you're in one of those areas, you gain a 15-point advantage over an entity that is not. That is a big advantage. So I will tell you that of those 126 REAP grant applications that we've done before, and Ryan, you'll have to maybe that's
of the 200. David, you are muted, I think. There we
okay.
go.
I don't know how I got
Yeah.
muted. So anyway, 68 out of those 200 were in a disadvantage or distress. Now, if you're looking at when that scoring criteria actually came into play in FY24 and FY25, we've had 5. So 5 out of about 30 assessments that we've completed. So about 16%. In FY24 and 25. So we do have an Excel spreadsheet that does this scoring. If anybody, and we will hand that out. That is a deliverable under our KCC grant. So if you would like to have that so that you could score your particular application, would be happy to hand that out. REAP loans, we'll just say they're available. I'm not going to spend any time on that. Since 2016, we have not done a single guaranteed loan. I talked with USDA previously, and they have done very few of them. But it is a program that is available. It will guarantee up to 75% of total eligible project costs, and you can do combined grant and loan guarantee funding as well. Okay, so information that we need, and this is on the energy efficiency side first, then we'll get into the renewable energy. So we do need all of the specs on the equipment. We'll need to know manufacturer and model number, details of warranties, number proposed, because in the grant application, all of these bits of information are required either in the technical report or on one of the forms that we have to prepare. So if we don't have it, that would be considered an incomplete application. So obviously the project cost is going to be a very important thing, but we'll also need for the installers, we'll need to know, does your company have a warranty on craftsmanship, workmanship, things like that. In all cases, if the project is $200,000 or more, we're going to need more information from you. So as we go from less than 80,000 to the 80,000 to 200,000 to above 200,000, the amount of detail keeps increasing for each one of those categories. And then this is relatively new, I think within the last couple of years. We do require, or USDA requires a vendor certification form, both on the energy efficiency side and on the renewable energy. And I'll tell you that it's pretty difficult on the energy efficiency side, unless, so say you had an HVAC person who was not only providing their own HVAC system, but installing it, they would have an easier time signing this vendor certification form as opposed to an electrician who was installing a piece of equipment that was manufactured and purchased from some other entity. Yeah, that's going to get a little bit difficult, but all I can tell you is that right now the vendor certification form is required for a complete application. On the energy efficiency side, again, going back to the grocery store, being our number one category, the most common energy efficiency is going from those open display coolers and freezers to closed ones. I looked in a couple of our past reports that we've done for various facilities, and we've seen up to a 56% reduction in energy just from that particular system. So they'd go from this open display cooler and they'd go to a closed cooler, and because now they're not trying to cool the entire store, it's just much more energy efficient. There are non-energy benefits. We realize that there are non-energy benefits to almost every single project that you can do on an energy efficiency side or renewable energy. For the grocery stores, that could be one less food desert if you're keeping that store open instead of having to close it because you can't operate it efficiently anymore. It's certainly more comfortable for your customers. They don't have to walk around in sweaters when they come into your store, when they go down the aisle where you have the open displays. There's less food spoilage because you can control that temperature a lot better, and there's less maintenance. Less food spoilage also not just due to being able to control that temperature a lot better, that it's closed and focused. But the old displays also used to have fluorescent lighting, which would put out a lot more heat. The current LEDs, of course, put out a lot less heat. Okay, so switching over to the renewable energy side of the house for all of you solar installers that are here, we do need a proposal from you. Almost everybody has that, so that's not a problem. We do need the energy generation, but we need the annual and a month by month. And most of you know the reason for that is because there are some months you're going to overproduce and some months that you're going to underproduce for what the historical electric consumption is for that facility. We need to be able to track that, because if you're in a situation where you overproduce and the utility does not compensate for that overproduction, you're not going to generate a value from that. And we have to be able to break that out, not only for the customer, but for USDA. We need to know your modeling software, whether it's PV Watts, Helioscope, some other typical thing. And it would be helpful to have a copy of that report so that we can do that. Now, what we will do is say you produced a proposal and you have the annual and month by month in there generated by helioscope. We will go into PV watts and we'll put in that information and see how close we are to what you generated for an estimate. We also need an aerial image of the proposed project, and absolutely we need manufacturer and model of the equipment. I realize some of you are reluctant to provide manufacturer and model because you're like, well, I don't know if I'll be able to get that 6 or 7 or 8 months down the road. We put into our reports, like if you're doing Jinko 400-watt solar module, we'll say Jinko 400-watt solar module or similar or equivalent. It gives you a little bit of wiggle room, but we have to provide in the report and on the forms warranty information. We have to ensure that the equipment is commercially available. And so if you get a company that's selling solar modules and they've only been in business for 6 months, USDA is going to look at that differently than a company that has been selling solar modules for the last 30 years and has, 250, gigawatts worth of modules sold in their history. So we'll need that. We need to know the number and wattage of the solar modules, the azimuth and pitch, and we need that because when we're doing the PV watts, and then your company's warranty information, just like we needed it for the energy efficiency side. And then we do also need a statement, company statement of qualifications or a resume if you're anyway, we just need to know, have you done this before? How many similar systems have you installed? What are your years of relevant experience? And then professional credentials and licenses that you or the company may hold. We also do need some environmental information. We do fill out an environmental checklist that is required as part of that. So we need to know if there's any tree removal, if there's going to be trenching, and if so, how much, what's the length, what's the depth, and then an image showing the location of the project and trenching for ground mount arrays would also be helpful. Again, if it's 200,000 or more, we are going to need a detailed development schedule. So it's going to be, what's your planning, what's your commissioning, what's your installation, what's your, what your permitting and things like that. And then we also, of course, require the vendor certification on the renewable energy side. It's a little bit easier for you solar installers because you're purchasing the equipment, you're installing the equipment, so it's a lot more palatable for you to say, yes, I certify that we're going to install it this way and that we're going to meet this generation estimate. Okay, shared meter projects. These are difficult for us. We're looking at on the energy efficiency side of doing some different things, using maybe a number of different calculators to generate estimates, and then we take the average of those and use those to see what the residence is contributing in terms of electrical consumption versus the business. But we if you're on a shared meter, the business has to be benefiting 51% or more of that the energy savings. So 50%, not 51. So typically, what we're going to tell you right now is if you're installing a renewable energy system that's connected to a meter that's also connected to a residence, we're going to say, yeah, we're not going to do that unless you install a separate meter, and that separate meter can be included as part of the REAP grant. But we're not going to go in and do a site visit and say, oh, well, the resident is doing this much, and we don't have the bandwidth for that right now. Now you can call a third party who might come in and do a residential site assessment and do that calculation, and we will certainly take that as a report and 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 do an application based on that. But
And
here's an
Da-
example of what happens with a shared meter. So say that you have a shared meter and combined residence and business, they consume 16,000 kilowatt hours. The home does 7,500, the business does 8,500. So you provide a quote for a 15,000 kilowatt system that costs about $30,000. So the business is actually using 56.7% of that energy. So you can see the 8,500 divided by 15,000. But because the business is only using 56.7% of the generated electricity, that means that of that 30,000 that you propose for the system, only 56.7% or $17,010 is going to be an eligible project cost. So therefore, if you're doing the 50% reimbursement, only 8,800 is going to be a potential reimbursement for that entity. So that's just important for all of you to know. That's the reason we don't typically do shared meter projects.
and
Sorry.
I'll just add that,
Yep.
if you want to install a temporary, temporary metering device at the house or, the business building or whatever to collect data for a period of time so we can, run those numbers, that's a possibility as well.
Yes. We will not do that on the energy efficiency side because the energy efficiency side is so much more greatly impacted by the weather and how it's operated during typical things. So we would prefer to have a year for an energy efficiency. But yeah, we'll try and work with you on a solar project. Okay, here are the vendor certification forms. You can see the one for energy efficiency. It's going to be a little bit different for the one for renewable energy. Won't dwell on these, but we'll tell you that yeah, these are a required part of the application package, and if we do not submit one, it would be considered an incomplete packet. Okay, understanding your utility bill, getting down to the last 13 minutes of the webinar. So I'm just going to show this. I will tell you that this was a graph that was taken out of a solar proposal that we had received. And I don't know how many of you would agree with this, saying that the new bill with the after the installation of a solar installation, that they are going to have negative bills after that installation has been implemented. That's just simply not going to happen. And the reason for that is because of the fixed versus the kilowatt hour dependent charges. So what we used to be able to do under, and this was, oh, I don't know, Kurt, Ryan, 2-3 years ago is when it changed. We used to be able to take the full costs and divide by the full number of kilowatt hours to come up with a simple or blended energy cost. So in this case, it's the 144.39 divided by 877.7, and you get 16 cents per kilowatt hour. However, changes to the REAP grant came up and said that you can only consider costs that are dependent on the energy use. So if you notice here, we have a fixed charge for the customer charge. So that's not going to change. You can go down to 0 kilowatt hours used during that month. You're still going to have that customer charge. So your bills aren't going to be 0, and any type of energy savings, either on the energy efficiency side or renewable energy are not going to be impacted by that. So we have to take those out now. So if you look at that same thing now, instead of $144, you can see the highlighted charges that we put in there. So this customer charge of $25.29 is not going to change, and the demand charge is not going to change. So we don't include those in the calculation. And so now you have 106 divided by 877 for a 12 cents per kilowatt hour. Okay, so that is how we will calculate, and that is the reason that USDA requires to have the actual bills so they can confirm what charges are being included in this cost per kilowatt hour calculation. So who cares? Does it matter? Well, it actually does. So if you're using a 16 cents per kilowatt hour, so if you had a $10,000 energy efficiency project that saved 10,000 kilowatt hours per year, your payback is going to be 6.25 years. If you drop it down to 12 cents per kilowatt hour using the same type of project, your payback is now 8.33 years. And I'm not expecting you to have the photographic memory, but payback was one of the scoring criteria that we would get into. So if you look at the point system, if you're between 4 and 8 years, you get 10 points. So this first one at the blended rate of 16 cents per kilowatt hour, you had a 6.25 year payback, so you get 10 points. Using the more accurate cost of 12 cents per kilowatt hour and a 8.3 year payback, you're down to 5 points. So you lose 5 points, but it is a more real world estimate of your return on investment for your clients. So, and you know, it's required. So we have to be able to do that. Demand charges, we don't usually put into a REAP grant application. USDA does allow them under some circumstances, but they have to be documented and justified. So, but typically we're not going to put them in there. So, but we do recognize that particularly on the energy efficiency side, that you can actually reduce the baseline demand depending on what kind of project you have. This is a very easily one where you're replacing metal halides with LEDs, and you can see that that cuts the lighting energy use and demand approximately in half. So you can see that the previous demand at 400 watts per bulb was 18 kilowatts, and the proposed demand going down to an LED at 207 watts brings that down to 9.3 kilowatts. So we could, based on the number of hours that you operate, we could see what that does on your demand charges. But again, they have to be justified, they have to be documented. So that's all the information I have. We're right at 11:53, so we will open it up for questions if anybody has any. And I'll just keep this slide up so that if anybody's interested in signing up for a mailing list, you can do so. But if you want to, you know, just see our website or, you know, who helps us out, you can take a look at that. So I'll open it up for questions. And I'll also open it up for Ryan and Kurt if they want to correct anything I've said in the last
hour. So Pete, I think you might have to unmute yourself. Apparently I can't. I thought I could unmute you, but it doesn't look like I can.
Hey, I just had a quick question. If you guys knew, since there's a little bit of a lag between for two reasons. One's because we have the applicant pay and show demonstration of financial responsibility for the project and actually pay for the project before the grant applies any value. If the same client goes to the IRS and asks for energy benefits under the IRA, is there some sort of, have you seen somebody get kind of crosshairs a little bit on recovering tax benefits under the IRA and getting the grant, or how that kind of has untangled?
Wow, that is an excellent question and one well beyond our purview. We do not, well, first I'll answer the question. I have not heard of anybody hitting that situation. I can absolutely see how that could occur, but we haven't heard anything. I guess in those circumstances, I would contact the USDA directly, or one of the small business development centers who provide technical and tax assistance to small businesses. But yeah, I could totally see how that could happen, particularly, you know, if they're going from the September or December rounds to the next year. Yeah. Wow.
Okay, we do have another question. Are there any proposed changes to funding levels after this round of applications?
None that I am aware of. I know that's probably not the answer you're looking for, but so typically we will not be advised of any funding changes until it hits the Federal Register. So yeah, we'll know when all of you know. I can say it's not, I don't believe it's anticipated, but we all know that there is an election coming up, and we all know that changes in administrations, if there is a change, you know, could impact various programs. So, yeah.
I'm not seeing any other questions at this point, but if anybody has questions, wants to unmute themselves, feel free.
Okay, well, we will go ahead and conclude for today. You can certainly send us an email at kansasenergyprog@ksu.edu, or to any of us personally. If you have contacts with us, be more than happy to help. Otherwise, what we will do is we're going to break for lunch, and then we're going to get busy on the other REAP grant applications that we have to get in by the 30th. So everybody have a great day and a great weekend.
Thank you,
And
guys.
thanks for joining us.
Thank you.